Okay, in the last video, we created a session and a cookie in order to store user information on the server, and we used that information to protect resources that we did not want to allow access to unless the user was properly authenticated and logged in. And we had a session and we created a session configuration object and we passed it into session, and then we used our restricted middleware to validate the cookie. The cookie contained nothing but the session ID number, and it automatically, the middleware session express session passed the session ID number to our resources as a way of saying, here's the number, is this a good number? And then our server, the software here, checked the session ID against what it had stored in the server. And if it checked out, then we allowed them in our middleware here. We say, hey, do you have a session object and is there a user on the object? If so, all right, you can go through. If not, then you're not going to pass. There is another way that is used also to protect endpoints and to do a similar function, and that's using a JSON Web Token. And the difference between the two is the JSON Web Token does not get stored on the server. So it scales a bit better because there's no needing room on a server in order to store all the user information. How the JSON Web Token works is when a user logs in. So let's go to our login real quick. When a user logs in, right now we were creating a cookie and we were going to store that on the server. But with the JSON Web Token, we create a token, but we don't store it on the server. What we do is we pass it back to the client and we say, all right, here's your magic decoder object. This object gets you access to resources. It's up to you, client, React, Angular, Vue, whatever front-end client tool you use. It's up to you to take this token, store it, usually on local storage, store it, and then with every request you make to a protected resource, you have to pass this token back on the headers. So let me show you what the header is. So like in Insomnia, right now when we log in, then once we log in, we can just go and get all the users and everything works out fine. When by using a JSON Web Token, we have to go to this header section and actually create an authorization, and then the token we're going to stick in this here. And that's what gets us access to the protected resources. So let me show you, there's a website, jwt.io, JSON Web Token, and this is a really cool site. I'm going to use it. So if you go to the debugger section, we can basically demystify what a JSON Web Token is. So a JSON Web Token, there's three parts to it. They're all separated by a period. So there's a period there and a period there, like a dot. And the first part of it has to do with the type of algorithm that it's being used and what's the token type. It's a JSON Web Token. The second part is the payload. This is the information that we are going to put into the JWT object. We're going to put the user ID and the username, and we're going to send it to the client and say, here's the user ID and the user name. And then the third part is the part that is the unique signature. And how this part works is when we create our token and we pass in a secret, it uses all that information to hash this big string value, and it uses that secret to create this object. And so to verify the signature, then you would need to pass, for instance, your secret in order for it to say that this is a passing value. I know that might seem a little confusing, but just to know that a JSON Web Token is an object that we create that does kind of the same thing that a cookie does, but the server is not storing it. We're creating it one time and we're sending it to the user, say, here it is. I'm going to create it, and as soon as you got it, I am not going to store it anymore. But now it's up to you to include it on every single request that you make going forward to any protected resources. So of course we're going to use a library. And so if you click on the library section, you can filter over here if you're working with Java or any of these languages. But we're clicking on Node, and there's two libraries. I'm going to use the JSON Web Token library right here. Copy that. And before I leave the screen, I want you to know that this library gives us basically two methods. Creating a token is commonly referred to as signing a token. So you create. So when we initially create the token, when we log in, then we create our token. We're going to call this sign method, and that's going to create our token. And then when we try to go to a protected endpoint, we're going to include in our middleware, we're going to a call to the verify, which is going to verify. Both of these need the secret in order for it to work. Okay, so let's go to our code base. First, let's take away everything having to do with sessions. So let's go to our server. Let's get rid of session up here. We don't need sessions. We don't need a session config object. And we don't need to call server.use session at all. Basically, the server goes back to being just kind of plain vanilla now again. We're going to save that. And now we're going to go to our auth routes where we logged in, and we are going to go to the login. Matter of fact, let me just close this register. There, shrink that down so you can just see the login component. We're going to delete, well, I'm going to use this information right here when we create our token, but we're not going to do it on the cookie. So I'm going to, well, you know what? I'll just delete it and we can type it over again. So how a token works is now when you log in, we're going to create a token. And then we're going to pass the token in this status. And so here's how you do that. So we're going to say const token equals generate token. This is a function that we're going to create. So this is a function that I'm going to create. I'm going to add a file to auth over here that is this function here, and I'm going to pass in my user information. So I'm going to call a function, and in this function that I'm going to create the token, and I'm going to use this user information as the payload portion of the token that I create. So I'm going to call this function, and then when it's done and it creates the token, and I have it in this variable, I'm going to pass the token to the client in my response right here. And how I do that is outside of the quotes, but inside of the curly braces, I pass the token now to the client. So when the client logs in and passes a valid username and password, then this then logic runs. And if the password checks out, then I say, all right, password, everything checks out, let's create a token. And let's use the user information to go into that token. The user information is going to get stored in that token. And then let's return that token right here with our response object. And that's how we do that. So let's save that. But this doesn't exist right now. So let's go and create this function right here. So let's go to our auth folder and create a new file. I'm going to call it generate token.js, and this is where we need to include our library. Oh, we have to install, first of all, we have to include our library. So let me kill the server, and we need to install that library, JSON Web Token, that I talked about right here. So we're going to use this library to help us with our token management. And so right here I'm going to say yarn add JSON Web Token. Hit enter. All right, that's been added. Good. So now that we have that library added, in our generate token function, we're going to require it. So I'm going to say const JWT equals require JSON Web Token, and there it is for me. Good. So now we're going to use the library right here, and so we're going to say module.exports equals. We're going to pass in. Remember, we're calling this thing, we're passing in the user. So we have to have a user here. And so now we're calling this function, we're passing in the user. And in here, let me make some notes. We need 3 things to create a token. We need a payload, we need a secret, and options. And I'll explain each. So let's take the first one. Let's do the payload. So let's create a payload. So const payload equals, and it's an object. And the payload is going to contain, payload. The payload is going to contain that information that we did when we did a session. Remember, we created a cookie and we passed in the user ID and the username. It's the same thing, but we're going to do it here instead. So our payload is going to be ID, and we're going to call it user.id, and username equals user.username. Did I spell that right? Username, yeah. You could deconstruct these two if you wanted to off of your argument passing in, but I'll leave that up to you if you want to do that. Then the second thing it needs is a secret. So const secret equals, and we have our secret stored in our env file, right? Our secret right here. So we're just going to call this, and so we're going to say const secret equals process.env.secret. And then of course when you deployed to Heroku, then you would include this secret in your config variable section of Heroku because it needs to know this secret. But this way, by storing it in our environment file, it doesn't get pushed up to GitHub, and nobody can really know what the secret is unless the people are on your development team and you let them know. And then finally, we need options. So let's say const options equals, and this is an object. And basically, it's how long is the token good for. So we're going to say call a function called expires in, and you can look up the documentation. You can do it like 2 hours, 3 hours, 1D for 1 day. The documentation lets you know all your options. I'll just say 1 day, and yeah, that's all I'm going to use. You can add more information to the payload. Add more data, but not more non-confidential data. Because as you can tell, we could just simply go to this site and paste in your token, and you could see what your payload is. And so the token itself isn't secure. It just basically is a hall pass that allows you to get to secure resources. So if someone got a hold, for instance, of your token and tried to change some information in it, then this signature, this would hash to a completely different value, and the signature would be invalid. And so the token, while itself it doesn't have any magical secret information, but coupled with the secret, when it gets encrypted, then it gives you a really good solid hall pass that the client needs to present with every request. All right, so now we got the 3 components that we need to create a token, and now let's return our token by calling. Remember I said we have this sign method. let's go back to the debugger. Whoop, we have this sign method that creates a token, and then this verifies a token. So let's call that sign method to create our token. We're going to say return jwt.sign. We're going to pass in each of these three items: payload, secret, and options. And this looks good. We'll save that. Okay, because we have this generate token file, we need to require it in the login because the login is calling it. So we need to require it up above. So I'm going to say const generate token equals require generate token. There it is, generate token. And so now we've extracted creating the token away into a separate file. And so now we're going to log in, we're going to create a token, and then we're going to pass the token back with our response object, our response JSON. And that will allow us to create a token. So let's save everything, and let's save all. And we'll get to the restricted middleware in a minute. Let's first just see if we can log in, make sure there's no changes I need to make. Everything looks good. All right, so let's start the server. All right, let's see if we can log in. Log in. JSON. We'll just log in with that user. And there we go. And so you notice because when we logged in, we returned a status and we returned this right here and returned the token. And that's what we're seeing right here, the token being returned. See, we see our message part right here, welcome, and then username, welcome Ethan. And then we also included the token. And now we have that right here. And so now let's just take this token. You don't include the double quotes. You just include everything in between the quotes. Let's copy that. Let's go to that jwt.io, and I'll show you how it's no big mystery. Let's go to debugger. Let's go right in here and paste our information in. And look at ID 5, Ethan. This is how long the token is good for. It starts at this time and it expires at this time. And this is a system date math kind of thing. And it says it's invalid because we haven't put our secret in here. But if I were to cut and paste my secret and paste it in here, then it would say valid. So it doesn't have the secret to validate it. But if you paste your secret in there, then this would say valid. But this is why you don't want to put super confidential information in your payload. Basically, all they have is a user ID and a name. There's no damage you can do with that because you can't log in with it. It's not a password. There's nothing unique about it. It's just a username and an ID number to a table. And so, okay, so now we were able to log in, create a token, and pass it back with our response object right here. And this is going to get passed back to your client, your front-end developer, and they need to take this and then store it somewhere. And so let me just show you, for instance, like a project that I had been working on a long time ago. So this is when I was the front-end developer. Someone else is the back-end developer. But I have a React application here, and don't judge me on the React code here. This is a long time ago when I was really starting out. But I just want to show you right here, I've set up a couple routes. I have a nav bar, and then I have a home route, a login route, and a register route. All of this right here doesn't require you to be logged in order to go to any of these routes. But the minute you log in, you will you're going to get that token returned to you right here. You're going to get this token returned to you. And then what you need to do is you need to store it. And so let me show you the login component where we do that, where the client, the front end developer actually did, where I did that. So let me go to my login component, and there's lots of stuff here, but this is where I'm calling, doing my axios.post. I'm sending in my user information to log in, and then look at if everything checks out in a response, then what do I get? I take the token off the response.data and I store it in local storage, and I call it JWT. So instantly I know that as soon as I log in, I'm going to get a token back, and I'm going to store it in local storage. And now that it's stored in local storage, if I go back to app.js here, now I have these routes that say, hey, if there's a JWT on local storage, now these routes become available. Else, if there's not a JWT or token stored, then these routes are not available. And so this particular app had, whether you logged in, you could log in as a worker or as a customer. And so, but either way, you log in, you grab that token, you throw it on local storage, and then once it's on local storage, now you can check for it. And now, remember I was explaining how we don't really have a log out on the server on the backend side, but if I go to my navbar component, navigation, let me go down to the log out, login, register, log out. So log out calls this method logout, and let's see what we do in logout. So logout, see, local storage, I just remove it. And that's literally all it takes when you're using a token to versus cookies. So to log out using sessions and cookies, then this endpoint would have to call an Axios call in order to call the destroy method in order to destroy the cookie. But since it's a token, basically all I have to do is just remove the JSON Web Token off of local storage, and now the user won't have access to any of the protected endpoints up front. So that's just a little idea on how the front end and the back end linked together. Okay, so we've been able to create our token and we've been able to log in. And so now let's use it to protect these endpoints. So we have, we don't need our generate token. This did its job, so that's good. And we have, and we don't need our auth routes anymore because we've created our token and returned it back. But our restricted middleware, see, we still have it right here. We need to refactor our restricted middleware now in order to work not with sessions. So let's delete all the information in there. And now what we need to do is we need to be able to rewrite this so that it works with the JSON token, web token. So for this, we're going to be calling the verify method, this verify method, in order to verify whether it's a good token or not. And so because of that, we need to require it up top. So I'm going to say const JWT equals require JSON Web Token, and here we go. Cool, I like it when it fills it in for me. And so now I'm going to say const token equals rec.headers.authorization. Bear with me, I know this seems confusing for a minute, but when I show you how we do the headers in Insomnia, then all will become clear. So rec.headers.authorization, and then we need the secret in order to pass into the verify method as well. So const secret equals process.env.secret, right? And then, so now this middleware, what does it need to do? It needs to check if there's a token. So, and it's going to find the token on the headers. And so the front end developer is going to put the token on the headers and with every request. And how we do that in Insomnia is we go to the header section here, and we're going to say authorization, and we're going to take this token right here in between the quotes. Don't include the quotes. Copy that. actually, we don't need it for the login. We need it for protected endpoints. So let's say, for instance, like if I went to a find all users, well, right now the code would, how did I get rid of this freaking thing here? I don't know what. Oh, I guess I just click on it, content type. Now, in order to go to one of these protected resources, we need to include an authorization header with the value of that token when they logged in. This value right here, I copied it. So let's go to find all users. Whoops. Well, let's go to find all users. Let's do, oh, I already have an authorization right here. Authorization. If there's not one there, like you can delete these. If there's not one there, you can add it and call it authorization. I think Postman automatic, well, look it, see, it's right there. You can click on it. And then you paste the value of your token from logging in, and you stick it right in there. It's not going to work because we've not finished our middleware yet, but this is how we're going to use it in Postman. So with every request to a protected endpoint, there has to be on the headers an authorization key value pair with the authorization and then the token, and then that will allow you access to the resources. So let's go finish our, so we're going to say grab the token off of the auth headers. So right here, it's being put on the header. And so what we're going to do right here is we're going to grab it off of the headers, the value, and I'm going to store it right in here. I'm going to grab what's the key value pair authorization, grab it and stick it in this token. Then I'm going to get my secret. Oh, this has to be all caps, right? Yeah. And then why does it make it lowercase? That's weird. All right. And then I'm going to say if there is a token, then, so if there is a token on the auth headers, if it exists, now let's run it through that jwt.verify method and see if it's a good token. So we're going to call jwt.verify. We're going to pass in the token. The secret, that's what it needs in order to decode it and make sure it's a proper token. And then it's going to return to us, it's going to use those two information and then do a callback and return to us either an error or the decoded token. And so it's going to take these two, run it through this method, and it's going to return to us. If there's an error, then it's going to return to us an error object. If not, then this will be null, and then it's going to return to us the decoded token. And so what we can do is we can say, because it's a callback, then we can simply say, after that callback, we can say if there was an error, then we can return a status of 401.json with a message of invalid token received. Else, that means else, like I said, if there's an error, there'll have a value here, else this will be null. And so if this becomes falsy, if it's null, then it'll flip else, then it must be good. We can actually rec.decoded token, we can store it, means decoded if we want, and then we just call next. Pass it right on through. In other words, things seem to be good. We'll grab the decoded token and let's just call next, and everything's good to go. If there is no token on the auth headers, then let's finish the other part of this else statement. Else, then we can say res.status of 401 also .json with a message of no token received. and that looks good. Save that, and now our restricted middleware has been refactored. We included our library, and then we rewrote it to say, grab what's on the headers. You should find an authorization object. If there is no authorization object, then it's going to come down here and give us an error. If there is, and we have our secret, and if we pass in the token that we get off the header, whatever that long string value is, this value here, pass this in coupled with the secret, and the two of those is what this method here needs in order to determine if it's a valid token or not. And if it isn't, it's going to give us an error object, and then we have logic to give us a response for that. And if it's good to go, then we're just going to basically call next. Let's save that. So now, and then our server, basically, we named the file the same. We just changed the guts of the formula, of the function. And so these still work the same. It still works like restricted middleware. We're just changing how it works inside to work with the JSON token. So now let's go, so let me try to go to a resource, like find user by username without passing a, let's make sure I'm logged in again. Let's just send. Okay, logged in. Let's copy everything in between the quotes, copy that, Control C. But let's try to go to this find user by username without passing an authorization header. Let's delete it. Delete it. All right, send. See, no token received, no token received. Now let's put a header here, call it authorization, and let's paste the token that we got back when we logged in. And now let's hit send, and now we have our information. We can do the same thing with this endpoint, find all users. I don't know if this token is any good anymore. I think I logged in with someone else. So let's paste the current token information that I got right here to this endpoint. We got on our auth header called authorization. Actually, let's do it without calling it first. Let's delete it all. Or let's pass something wrong, like a partial one. We'll say invalid. Oh, look at, I misspelled that. Invalid token received. All right, so now let's paste a valid token in there and hit send. And then we have access to our information. And so that is how we use a JSON Web Token. Let me go first get rid of that spelling error. Save that. And that is how we use a JSON Web Token to protect endpoints instead of using sessions and cookies. Sessions and cookies, since the session information is stored on the database, it is the concept of a session and a cookie is more like Redux. It's a centralized location that's keeping track of all the users that have access and that are properly logged in. Where a JSON Web Token is kind of like, if you're a React developer, it's kind of like local state, where I'm going to create it, I'm going to pass it back, and then you use it wherever you need to use it. And if you don't need to use it, then that's fine, but I'm going to create it. I'm not going to store it on the server. I'm not doing anything with it, but here is a valid token. It's up to you to use it if you want to request resources that are protected. So hopefully that was clear. I look forward to having you in the next video. I think we're going to talk in the next video about how we can kind of hook this up so that it can be used like in a front-end app. Like I showed you a little bit here, how it was used, how the front end and the back end talk to each other. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to having you with me next time.